Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to memoQ Talks. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of memoQ Talks. It's a very special episode because we are going to have not one, not two, but three guests. We're going to have Carrie Fisher, who is the manager of Localization Services at Subway, Charles Campbell, who is the founder and CEO of TBO and TBO Talent, and Rick Antezana, who's my neighbor, my friend, my cycling mate, but also the CEO of Dynamic Language. And we're going to be talking to these three guests about opportunities, both in terms of market share expansion, business development, and operational support in South America or Latin America and the Caribbean. We're also going to talk about the second annual Vamos Juntos event, which is coming up in this spring, and some other things. But before we do all that, let me welcome each one of our guests. Start off with Carrie. Carrie, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Hey, my pleasure. And I think you're in Boise, Idaho?
I'm in Boise, Idaho. We have our first snow day today. We got 3 inches overnight, and there's already about a dozen wrecks on the highway. So staying home, which I normally do anyway, but my son is still sleeping.
Oh, so it's a snow day. They love it. Snow day, yes. I would think a place like Idaho that a snow day wouldn't slow you down as much, because in Seattle, if we get like a half-inch snow, we have hills and stuff, and plus people and everything just shuts down. And kids are like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's great. We live in a valley, so we don't usually get a lot of snow. It's the mountains, that get the snow, but not today. It's
awesome.
Us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining it. Let me just ask you, it looks like a picture of the Eiffel Tower behind you.
I have
any special significance?
So France is in my heart all the time. So I studied and lived in Avignon, which is in the south of France, and that's my degree from Northern Illinois University from 1990. So I've been in this localization business for quite some time.
That's awesome. I'm in Zagreb, Croatia right now, and I have friends in Lyon, and they're like, "Dude, come over here." So I'm trying to work that out. Charles, how are you?
Doing very well. No snow here. Of course, I'm in Cordoba, Argentina, and it's like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so very sticky. Global warming, El Nino or La Nina, I forget which one is hit, and it's very sultry. So I'm sitting under an air conditioner. Different story from you guys.
Sounds like a very cool move, Charles. Get it? Sorry, I can't help myself. And Rick, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, it's an early one for me here. I'm still in Seattle, unlike you, Mark, traveling to exotic places. It's stormy, wet, cold, dark. So yeah, all the fun things. And by the way, Carrie, I was going to mention one of my favorite areas of France, Avignon, Verquier, that little area. I was fortunate enough to travel there, I think in 2012, and explore the area, a little wine tasting, all that. It's amazing. So I can see why you really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Hey, Rick, you and I kind of share a mutual hardship because our team lost in the the college football, American football. For you people that don't know about American football, it's kind of crazy in America. It's like huge. In fact, like the highest paid public employees in most state is the college football coach. University of Washington coach, I think, makes $5 million a year. I know it's crazy, but our team lost in the national championship. I was just getting over jet lag. I'd been in Croatia for like 4 days, and I was like, I think I can sleep. And then I woke up at 1:30 in the morning, and I realized the game is on. So I woke my son up, who's here with me, and the games go on for 4 hours, which is ridiculous. And so I'm back on jet lag. But anyway, dude, second in the country is not bad, right? I mean,
it is not bad, and it's funny when we were texting during the game, you and I. It's 4 a.m. for you, and you're enthusiastically into it. I mean, of course, we all were. And hey, let's be real. It's second in the country, and in the fourth quarter, we were still in the game, and
totally.
We got beat by a better team. I'm going to give them credit, but anyway, enough about football.
Awesome. Well, hey, so let's talk about a region where they play football a little bit differently. Let's talk about Latin America and Caribbean, and I want to kind of go around the room here and ask each of you from your perspective, what opportunities do you see in Latin America, Caribbean? And Carrie, let's start with you. In terms of market development and expansion, what is Subway? How does Subway look at Latin America?
It's one of the fastest growing markets for Subway right now, so it's huge. And of course, we started in probably Mexico. I'd have to go back and look at our archive to see, what countries we went into first. But I quickly learned that there are different flavors of Spanish. In previous jobs, it was all about, universal Spanish, right? Well, we need something that works in Latin America and something that works in Europe. And that kind of works for software because it's the same, a lot of the terms are the same and it's quite boring, right?
Because they're new terms as well, right? I mean, so you come up with some new, like airplane is air. Yeah. So go ahead.
In Subway, not only do we localize to the local market in terms of our menu, the look and feel is the same, but the franchisees have the choice of putting whatever they want, not whatever they want on their menu, but, they can test certain things in certain markets. So for me, it's really important to get the right flavor of Spanish in each of our markets. So including the U.S. And the U.S. Spanish market this year for Subway is going to be huge. We're missing not a big opportunity. I think we're not serving our employees in the U.S. who speak Spanish well enough. So U.S. Spanish is going to be a big one for us. But even, where I was going with this was, I learned the hard way that the term straw can be translated in about 5 or 6 different ways, depending on what country that you're in. And I learned the hard way because, the Chileans are like, no, that's not the right word. The Mexicans were like, nope, we use this word. It's like, oh my God. So it's really important.
No, it's funny. I lived in Asia off and on for about 20 years, and Japan has 20 different words for rice. So you have to really be specific. So, and it's actually great that you brought that up. I do want to come back to cultural nuances and differences in flavors across the region in terms of market expansion for Subway. Do you see, are there some countries that are growing extraordinarily fast, or is it the same all across the region?
No, it's in South, it's Brazil.
Is it?
So we, let's see, how do I put this? For some countries, we enter into an agreement called a master franchise agreement. Mm-hmm. And that is when a specific company or set of companies buy the right from Subway to open restaurants wherever they deem it to be a good place. Mm-hmm. They do everything. So we did have a master franchise agreement in Brazil. Due to financial issues with the company that was opening restaurants for us, it's now back on us. So I think that's good. Subway has an excellent model for rapid global expansion, and this is going to be no different. So we started off owning it in Brazil, and now we're going to end up owning it in Brazil. But we are in double-digit growth, 12 awesome. Consecutive quarters. So we're just expanding globally. We're opening hundreds of new restaurants.
That's awesome. So I want to come back to that because that would necessitate a lot of operational support, especially in the language area. We'll come back to that in a second. Let me jump over to Charles and then Rick. In terms of Charles, I mean, you're TBO is born and raised in Latin America. I mean, right? So you would probably know that market. I'm guessing originally you were doing a lot of operational support or doing you're providing services for companies who maybe not in South America. What do you see and correct me if I'm wrong, but what do you see in terms of market expansion opportunities across Latin America for localization services?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Latin America is a very fast-growing region, and there are some countries that are growing slower than others. There's geopolitical factors and so forth. There's all sorts of stuff going on, as there is in almost every corner of the world. Um, and we forget that there's a war in the Middle East. There's a war in Eastern Europe. There was a war in other wars in Eastern Europe 20 years ago. So, there's a lot of stuff going on this planet, but the economy is moving forward in Latin America very strongly. And there are many, many business opportunities. There's a lot of different countries, two main languages, Spanish and Portuguese, so much simpler than, for example, going into Europe, where you have so many different languages, and you have some languages where only a couple of million or even lower numbers of people speak them, so it makes it more challenging in terms of your localization spend. I think Latin America is amazing as a region in its simplicity in that sense. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff going on that makes it a complex place to do business. But one very interesting thing about Latin America is the time zone alignment with the United States. So uh, a very significant part of South America is well aligned with Eastern Standard Time or Mountain Time in the United States. Depends on where you are. Sometimes daylight savings throws a spanner in the works because some countries do it in Latin America and other countries don't. But it means that operationally it's much easier for American, Canadian, and even European companies to do business in Latin America because they can actually talk to people without it being 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. It's not, I don't know how you do business with someone who's in Australia. It's just really hard to get them on a call or to get on a call yourself without someone having to stay up at 4 a.m. even after a football game, Mark. But
But
there's a lot going on in Latin
plus they have
America.
that accent, you know. so, um, so I mean, you're talking about the operational advantages, and we're going to come to that. But again, I want to. Sorry, I'm keep pushing on this, but I want to come back to market opportunities for localization services. If Charles, if I was the CEO of a global LSP, and I said, Charles, we want to pick a market in Latin America to set up an office, not for production services or operational support, but actually to sell. Okay, which market should I go to?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer in terms of pick one. I mean, there's definitely, they say that Miami is the capital of Latin America. Like the Latin Grammys are held in Miami because there is no Switzerland in South America where it's in the middle and it's neutral. So, I mean, Brazil is a 200 million person strong market. Um,
Mm.
and by and large, it has a healthy economy. It's gradually opening up more and more to international trade. Still not an easy place to do business. It still has high wage taxes and things that American companies find difficult to understand. The old maternity leaves and different all sorts of benefits that an
It's
American would,
communism, man.
yeah, it would
Sorry,
be
I was
deemed
just joking.
communism in America. But I think Mexico is definitely the number one market today that American and Canadian companies are looking at because of the free trade agreement. Also, because of geopolitical questions, some companies are pulling out a little bit from China, a little bit of jitters with China. In Mexico, you can produce a Tesla car in Monterrey in Mexico and then ship it to the U.S. on a train. And the logistics are pretty simple rather than having it come from halfway across the world in Asia. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, in Mexico, a lot of investment going into Mexico. Um, Mexico for the localization industry is a curious one. It's not historically been as active as other countries, for example, Argentina or Brazil or Colombia. But I think there's a lot is happening, and it's maybe just under the surface, and we're not finding out about it as much. The domestic market is what a lot of localization companies are focusing on. So you don't see the people from Mexico at international events quite as much as you hear from the Argentinians or the Brazilians or whatever. But I think Mexico is definitely the number one market for American foreign investment at the moment, and that foreign investment generates localization and translation needs.
No, that's interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. You brought China into the equation there in terms of a comparison, and it's interesting. When I was at CLS Communication running Asia, China was very interesting for us because we had a lot of requirements for Chinese into and out of Chinese translation, and we initially started off in Shanghai as a production center, but it became our fastest growing market. Very difficult to compete against local companies there. They don't go to international events. The largest Chinese translation companies, they have that domestic market and they have those domestic relationships. At CLS, we had a very unique kind of angle, value add in terms of we specialized in financial translation, putting people on site, so on and so forth. But most companies still don't even look at China as a localization services market to grow in. They look at it as a production center. So I think it's very similar to what you're saying with Mexico. Rick, you are the CEO of an LSP, as is Charles. If you, I don't know, I mean, because I know that you have some operational teammates or members in Latin America. But do you look at Latin America as an opportunity, a place that you want to sell into?
It's a great question. I see it more from the angle of my customers and what their activities look like and where they're trying to sell and what they're up to. Certainly, I think, Charles, you made a great point when you talked about, hey, in all of Latin America, even if you add in the Caribbean, you can cover the vast majority of it with Spanish and Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese specifically. We're talking about over 400 million people. And it's a huge economy. I think in 2023, I was just trying to look up a couple stats. We're talking about $5.1 trillion in 2021, and obviously it's gone up since then. It's a very powerful economy, and I'm certainly no expert when it comes to that, to the economics and the opportunities specifically. But I will say, from the perspective of manufacturers, a lot of our customers are manufacturers that have high regulatory requirements. They're going into South America. They are translating their directions for use if it's like a medical device, things like that. They're going into these markets aggressively. I don't know that there is much of a focus as you're talking about, Carrie, with a lot of these. I mean, I think because you guys are B2C in certain ways, I think it benefits you a lot by going that direction and being hyper local when it comes to language, which is, I guarantee it's appreciated by the local audience. But yeah, when I think about South America, I mean, I am a student of South America, as in I read about it all the time. And I'm, in addition to what we're going to be talking about in the future, I have big plans for travel in South America in the near future, as you and I have talked about, Mark. But I think even though the per person GNP in South America is not as high, certainly as North America. In the US, for instance, I think it's like roughly 20,000 US dollars per person in South America or Latin America in general. But I think we're seeing something here in the United States, which is probably getting to be more and more true. And Charles, maybe you can comment on this, but like smartphones, for instance. Basically everybody in the United States has one. Even homeless people on the streets in Seattle are like, hey, I know you don't have any change, but can you Venmo me? That would be awesome. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's kind of ubiquitous. And I wonder if that trend is going to, you know, kind of find its way down to all parts of the Western Hemisphere, which I think is pretty realistic, just that everybody is connected and that opens up lots of opportunities. But yeah, no, I think it's a vibrant economy. It's an amazing place from a tourism standpoint. I'm a huge fan of Latin America.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing from all three of you is, in terms of market expansion opportunities or potential, South America or Latin America is rapidly growing. Okay. And unlike Europe, basically you have two different languages. And so, you know, you don't need to worry about 20 different languages. In fact, I don't even know what the EU, I think it's like in the 30s total official languages, which can be very challenging in terms of operational support and margins and all that. Let's get over to the operational kind of support opportunities in Latin America. And Charles, you're probably the expert on that because, you know, you started TBO or translation back office originally in Argentina. So, you know, what do you see? And like, if you were talking to a friend who was thinking about, hey, maybe I should offshore, or maybe I should set up an operational center in Latin America, why would I do it? Where would I do it?
Well, why would you do it is easier to answer. Why would you do it? Because you're talking about the talent that you're going to get. And when I say talent, I don't want to talk about better talent. I don't like the notion of better or worse talent. But what I will say is very experienced in the localization industry talent. So project managers, localization engineers, desktop publishers, linguists that know how to use the tools that we use, or to use several of them in quite a surprisingly sophisticated way. So there's an ecosystem of companies operating. People move from one company to another. Several large companies, international companies, have localization departments in Latin America. There's a lot going on. So there's what we call in Spanish a mercado de pases. People move from one football club to another football club, and they take their experience with them, and and you get these amazing resumes. Also, I would say, this is a very big generalization, but I think that talent in Latin America tends to stay at any particular job for quite a bit more time than the average American. I think that has a lot to do with cultural factors. Maybe the job market is so overheated in some parts of the U.S. economy that people are just flooded with opportunities, and they jump from one job to another. I'm not saying it's like Japan, where people work for 25 years at Toyota, but people stick it out, I think, in Latin America for a longer period of time, generally speaking, with each individual employer. Of course, there's cultural gaps. Latin Americans do tend to expect more public holidays, maternity leave, things like that. So these are trade-offs that American companies in particular think have to evaluate before they move into Latin America. In terms of where to locate an office, that's a very tricky question, because Latin American countries take turns at getting into strife economically and politically. So right now it's Ecuador engulfed in drug violence. 10 years ago, Ecuador didn't have a significant drug violence problem. And if you go remember in the 1980s, it was Colombia that was synonymous with drug violence, and now Colombia is relatively quiet. Probably downtown Newark is more dangerous than a city in Colombia these days. So, the countries in Latin America do take turns at boiling over a little. But there's a lot of stable options. People talk a lot about Costa Rica, but more as a retirement option, not too much localization activity going on at the beach for obvious reasons. People are just doing yoga and surfing. But Argentina is definitely where a lot of companies have chosen to put their focus. But Argentina is a story of its own. It's if you can make it in Argentina, you can make it anywhere. It's a very complex country. Right now, we have a new libertarian president who is trying to do everything at once. So we're just going to see how that works out. But before him, we had a very long period of governments that were unfriendly to business. But nevertheless, it's a very interesting ecosystem. One thing I will say about Latin American countries is that to varying degrees, they will focus on their local economy, a little bit in the way that you mentioned China did. So the LSPs, for example, in Chile, they're almost exclusively focused on the local Chilean demand. Same could have been said for Mexico until very recently. So that's one of the reasons why we created Juntos, the association that represents localization, translation, and interpreting companies in Latin America and the Caribbean, was to network and cross borders and get to know each other better, because basically nobody in Mexico had any idea what was going on in Brazil. Nobody in Brazil had ever heard of the translation industry in Peru, and Peruvians weren't connected to Argentina, and so forth and so on. So one of the things that Juntos is doing is creating these regional events. Vamos Juntos, the second one is coming up in Lima in March 14 to 16. And the idea is to bring people together. That's what juntos means, both in Spanish and Portuguese. It means together. Bring people together and learn
Yeah.
more about the rest of the region and reposition the region vis-a-vis how it is regarded worldwide. Take its seat at the table. Fundamentally have a voice. Latin Americans can be quite loud
Yeah.
in the translation and localization industry. They haven't had too much of a voice at the other than at the big table, so
So
to speak, so far. So that's what's going
it's
on.
interesting. Thank you for that, and I definitely we're going to talk more about Vamos Juntos in a second here. It's interesting. I think the first time I met Rick was at Gala in San Diego, and do you remember the country that had the most attendees there, aside from America?
I believe it's Argentina.
It was Argentina. It was amazing, man. I mean, it was just I can't remember the number, but it was maybe 30 something people from one country, which was, I think that the whole event maybe it was 300 people or something like that. So that was pretty impressive.
No, that's true. But just as
Rick,
just as a percentage of total attendees, it was outrageous how many, the percent that they represented, just the Argentinians. But yeah, I mean, they're very vested in the industry.
And to Charles' point,
yes.
Everybody there had a lot of experience in localization. I mean, it was not people like, oh, I'm kind of new to the industry, trying to,
bilingual.
No, I mean, these people, deep subject matter expertise. Last question on the business side, and then we'll jump into Vamos Juntos eventually. Got one more thing I want to bring up, but Rick, like, how do you look at Latin America from your perspective? You're situated up in Bellevue, Washington, or your headquarters is in the region there anyway. You sell services across the country, but how does Latin America play into your game?
Yeah, that's a great question. And truly at this point, we sell services across the globe. We have customers well beyond the United States and Europe, Canada, Mexico. Haven't really delved into Asia much yet, but still, room for growth. But the way that we have changed over the years, it's in the realm of talent. It has been to expand globally and to find talent in other places, looking at taking advantage of time zones, of economies being different. And so we have, and I don't really think of it in terms, it's funny because Charles, you mentioned the concept of where would you open an office, so to speak. I mean, at this point, we, as an example, we do have a physical office in Seattle, but the vast majority of our team is remote. They work remotely from their home or whatever. We don't have to have physical space where we have talent. And I would say that, I work with partners to help make that happen. And so we have a couple of different models. Honestly, we work with Charles. We have some talent through TBO. We've got people in Ukraine. We've got a number of people in the Philippines and a number of people in Argentina. So two of our other partners are Latamways and then also Kinetic Staffing. And so I think strategically, for me, it made sense to go through a partner and to have more or less a Sherpa to help guide us along the way of, hey, what should we be paying for talent? And if it's not working out, how do I get somebody else in there that is working out? And I will say, Charles, you and your team have made it really easy. We really love all of our partners that we work with that help us find talent. So sometimes we do direct hire, sometimes we do, contract hire through another partner. It just depends on service. But I would say that the time zone advantages of working with people in different places is amazing. I will say, and my Philippine staff, the ones that work our West Coast USA hours, I don't know how they do it. I mean, they start their day at midnight and they work through till 8 in the morning. And we're like, I'm so sorry. Like, do we need to?
I've been on email threads with you where you've had some operational support from the Philippines. And I was thinking the same thing. It's like this person responds no matter what time it is. It's like it's amazing.
My PA in particular, she's amazing with that. But I would say, just to kind of cap this though, the advantages of I think South America is a great example in general. I think you can find great talent in Colombia, in Ecuador, Argentina, Chile. Like, there's great talent all over the place, and there are new and easier ways to find that talent if you are open to being adaptable and flexible. And so it's something that we're certainly not going away from. I mean, there's just too many advantages to going that way.
Awesome. Appreciate the insights there. And I think that's some pretty sage advice. Get Sherpa Charles or another local person to kind of guide you into that market there. Hey, Carrie, from where you sit, what what are some of the challenges and maybe some of the wins that you've had operationally, in Latin America?
I would say hiring directly a Brazilian Portuguese translator. At the time, the content volume was increasing, and I was getting some complaints, from the market. So I ended up hiring a translator directly, and then Brazil became the master franchise agreement, and I thought, oh shoot! But I transitioned Joshua into a project management role because I am an army of one at Subway. I don't have any other staff. It's just me. And the ability to go on vacation was getting challenging. So Joshua just takes over for me, as he's doing starting tomorrow when I go to Australia, as we were talking about. It's a long, long way away. And now that we're bringing Brazil back into house, it's just perfect timing. So Joshua can take on more work, and it's been wonderful. The other operational thing I did was hire a Argentinian-based LSP. So somebody who has the offices or contacts in all the different Latin American, South American countries, so we can make sure to get that correct flavor of Spanish when we're talking about straws, which is kind of random, but for Subway, it's exceptionally important. It's the craziest, little words that can change depending on where you are. So.
I think you're all three saying the same thing. Get that local guide when possible. I do. Can I ask you a question about Subway? My youngest son works for Jimmy John's, and
that's okay. Rourke Capital is buying us. Probably we're going through the FTC, all that stuff. Okay. And now we'll be in the same family if it goes through. We'll be in the same family, and Jimmy John's will be one of the restaurants that will be in the Rourke franchise family.
I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
Yep.
So, but my son, the reason that he's been working there almost for 2 years, and the thing that sealed the deal for him is every day he can get a free Jimmy John's sandwich. So I'm just wondering, do you get a similar perk at Subway?
Yes, I don't. I don't work in the restaurant. I have to. Okay. In fact, I had Subway last night as I was driving madly to my, HOA board meeting. I'm the secretary, homeowners association. I grabbed a Subway because it was right next to the hair salon that I was getting my hair done at. I'm like, but no, I paid for that, right? I mean, okay. These are individually owned. These are business owners, right? Right. Yeah, they pay us a royalty, but they own that restaurant, so we don't get to
show up and say, "Hey, where's my sandwich?" So, I get that. Awesome, right?
I did wear. I forgot I had my Subway vest on one time, and I would, usually running in there, and they're like, "Ugh!" And I'm like, "Oh, it's okay." It's, and I was like covering it up.
I'm from the corporate office. Give me my sandwich. No. So Charles, we're going to get into Vamos Juntos right after this, but let me ask each of you, do you have an interesting anecdote or story to tell about the, assumptions that are made in terms of translating for Latin America? Could be like, Spain, Spanish versus Latin, or country-specific nuances. I mean, what's a favorite story? Charles, let's start with you.
Well, I've got a favorite story. I mean, it's not a funny one, but over the years, I can't remember the number of times that I've been told to dumb down texts when the target market is Latin America. So don't use tricky words like ophthalmologist. Use eye doctor or something like that. And I think that's based on a real misconception that Latin Americans won't understand this terminology. And the fact of the matter is that because of the Latin roots of Spanish and Portuguese, the language is automatically more sophisticated in some ways than English. So when you say, city edge, and in Spanish you would say the city periphery. That's just a silly example, but this notion that language should be dumbed down for Latin America is a big mistake. Or what was the word? Use fifth grader Spanish, even though the text is targeted at an adult in English. And it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake. And I think that relates to the fact that maybe people who request this presume that the target audience, because they don't speak English well, may be lacking in education or lacking in general comprehension ability. And that's simply not the case. And it's just far more common, actually, to say, I went to the eye doctor in English or the eye specialist than it is in Spanish. I mean, doctor de ojos, we don't use those words very often. The ophthalmologist or all the different oncologists, all the different medical terminology is so much more common in everyday Spanish than it is in English. So anyway, what I was just trying to say was this anecdote of having to push back and negotiate that you don't need to write it in a fifth grader Spanish just because, even though it's targeted for an English adult in the United States. That's just something I've done many, many times. I'm sorry it's not a funny story, but I think it's important and relevant.
No, but I think that's amazingly insightful. And, like, for example, in a lot of the regulated industries, there are readability requirements. So because they want for example, the instructions for use to be readable or accessible by somebody with an 8th grade education on it. And that's common across all EU. But I think what you're talking about is a wholly different assumption, that, people wouldn't use this word regardless. So I think, wow. I mean, that insight right there is worth the ticket of admission for this podcast, because, I mean, if you're localizing into any South American markets, you want to be aware of that potential issue. Carrie, do you have an interesting story or anecdote?
That's a horrible bias. I just have to say, that's really bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, do I have a funny story? Not really. I think what I come up against every so often is, somebody within Subway using a machine translation that, hasn't been curated for Subway content. So they'll just go outside and use something and then send it to me and go, is this right? And Subway is translated as Metro. No, it's not right. You still need to come to me. I know.
That's your brand. It's just like, we've just been rebranded.
Yeah. It still happens. So it's not a constant battle. It's just, it comes up every so often. So I guess it's kind of funny. And at least they come to me and say, can you check this out? We had it machine. No.
Well, let me ask you, how do you deal with the nuances in terms of the different markets? For example, in China, the way you translate hotel can be different depending on, are you in North China, Central China, or South China, right? Or even in Hong Kong, which is, so, and you can call them like regional dialects in China, but I don't know if you have dialects or you have accents or you just have nuanced differences in terms of South American Spanish or Latin American Spanish. How do you deal with that? And
at least I don't have to deal with China for the most part, as that is another master franchise agreement country. So I don't get to translate into simplified anymore. But yeah, I mean, how I handle it through, Latin America, South America is, like I said, just hiring the people in country that know what they're doing. And it's funny, Miami was mentioned as kind of the hub. We have a Miami office that handles Latin and South America. That's where the people are. I was in the Miami office about less than a month ago. And I was able to I was able to meet a lot of my stakeholders. So for the first time, and one man, in fact, the director of operations, found me. Like, he knew I was in the office and found me and just said, "Thank you so much for all of your support. You're doing, a great job." Because
very cool.
It was really nice. So
awesome.
I think I'm doing okay.
Awesome. No, Miami's interesting because, like, I've traveled across most of the U.S. and I hadn't been to Miami up until I think it was about 10 years ago. And most cities across the U.S. have a kind of similar, oh, this is an American city feel. And I flew into Miami and we were in South Beach and I was like, whoa, I'm not in America, man.
No.
This is a beautiful city. Loved it. I was just like, I get it why people want to live here.
The first time I went, my luggage was lost. And I had to go to the American Airlines counter, and nobody spoke English. And so they had to find somebody who spoke English. I mean, my Spanish is decent, but, I was like, okay, what's the word for luggage? What's the word for
What's the word for luggage?
Yeah, it was just funny. I was like,
Carrie can talk straws all day in Spanish, but that doesn't help when your luggage is lost. So I totally get it.
Right. That's funny. Okay, so Rick, what's your funny story?
One that I was personally involved in, and it's a story that I think everyone in our industry has heard 1,000 times, and it's the Chevrolet story. They had a car that they manufactured in the 70s
Nova.
called the Chevy Nova, and in Spanish, Nova basically means doesn't go, more or less. And so from a marketing standpoint, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to sell a car that means doesn't go when you're trying to get somewhere. Apparently, they renamed it to the Caribe, and it did much better after that. But it's a classic example of not understanding your target market and branding properly.
That's a great story. Why didn't they just, instead of Nova, why didn't they just cut out the no and just call it Nova?
Mark, you missed your calling in. You should be in marketing for sure. Vamos.
Hey,
Vamos.
Okay, I think this is a great way to segue into
done. That's
Vamos
a great segue.
Juntos. Okay, not no vamos, it's Vamos.
For the record, I own one.
Wow.
So
I had
Charles,
a Nova.
Muscle car. I like it. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. Charles, give us the brief version of the origin story of Vamos Juntos, and then let's quickly transition to what Rick and Carrie is going to do at this year's event.
Well, sure. Vamos Juntos is going to take place in Lima, Peru, from March 14 to 16. We're expecting between 120 and 150 attendees. The number just seems to go up and up. It's the second conference that Juntos is organizing. The first one was in March of 2023 in Rio de Janeiro. It was a big success with 56 attendees, which was pretty amazing considering our original target was 20. So if you think about international associations representing translation companies, localization companies, interpreting companies, took them quite a while to get to this number of attendees. People coming in from all over Latin America and the Caribbean, Europe, North America, an amazing speaker lineup. So as I said earlier, it's also about getting to know each other. I only went to Mexico for the first time 2 months ago, and I've been doing Mexican Spanish translations for 25 years. It's embarrassing to say that was my first time in Mexico 2 months ago. So there's a lot to be learned. Latin America and the Caribbean is a vast region. It's so much bigger geographically speaking in terms of square miles than Europe. There's a lot of different. There's just two main languages. There's other languages that are important too, like Haitian Creole and indigenous languages and so forth. There's other languages going on, but in terms of localization strategies, it's pretty simple. And the conference is about bringing people together from all over. We're going to have a pre-conference workshop with Renato Beninato. Rick is going to be there. Carrie is going to be there. Both of them are going to be speaking. It's really exciting. So I'm on the board, and we've been working hard for it seems like forever to get this off the ground, and it's just around the corner now. So very exciting.
Awesome. Well, first kudos for you and the rest of the board for launching this event last year, and congratulations on the success. I mean, 100. I think you said like 114 people already in, and you still got a couple months out, and so that's amazing. It's awesome because I think there's like this mental thing too, like, oh, we've never had an event there, and now I got to go to South America, and that's like really far, and it's just. It hasn't become part of the circuit yet, but it's rapidly coming part of the circuit. When you have ALC and you have Gala and you have Loc World and so on and so forth, and it sounds like Vamos Juntos is rapidly getting on the circuit. Rick, you're going to be speaking there. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're going to speak and like, why did you
Yeah.
decide to participate and,
Yeah,
what you're
definitely. I
looking
mean,
forward to?
I'm looking forward to so much about it. It's interesting though, Mark. You bring up an interesting aspect to that as far as the destination and the perception that maybe, oh my gosh, that's kind of a long ways to go. And I think of it in terms of though as opportunity, honestly, because this, to answer your question, part of what caught my attention is like, whoa, an event in Lima, Peru, someplace that I've really wanted to go to. I've been to the airport, not quite the same thing, but we're talking about in the Western Hemisphere. It has a reputation, Lima has a reputation as the top culinary place in all of the Western Hemisphere. And this includes New York, LA, Chicago, Mexico City. I mean, like, you take the entire hemisphere, Lima's at the top according to many, many lists, Michelin starred restaurants, all this stuff. So the food scene is insane. So I'm very much excited to explore that a little bit, and that was a motivating factor. But then also, once I heard about the previous Vamos Juntos event, and I got to give Charles and the board credit for being very strategic about location and about how they market this and everything like that. And it caught my attention. And it's not like I put my name out there as a speaker all the time. But this is one where I thought, hey, I'd love to participate and to be part of the ecosphere that they're putting together with this. To answer your question, as far as myself, I want to talk about marketing. I want to talk about marketing that is specific to the language services industry. Based on research that I've been doing for a while now. And I want to put out there some concepts and ideas that are actionable, that are not necessarily high cost things that people can take action on. And it's from each perspective, I would say, within the industry, from the language service company, from the single language vendor, multi-language vendor type companies, how, depending on their target markets, how can they get ahead? What are the actionable things that they can do? What are the free and subscription platforms out there that are effective? I want to have everybody come away from my talk with hopefully some inspiration and certainly some tools and some strategies that they can employ. So that's my concept anyway. That's why I pitched to Charles and the board, and they said, okay, I guess we could have you there. We'll find a spot. So they said vamos.
They said vamos.
Exactly right. So I'm excited about it though.
So couple things, Ben. I mean, like I'm not planning on going. I have no like business in that interest at all. But like you're talking about the food, and I'm like, oh god, I got to figure out a reason to get there.
It's a real thing.
and then to people I've had very structured conversations with you about sales and marketing. I've also had a lot of the informal conversations as we're riding our bike and stuff. And I could say that you're super knowledgeable, and I've learned a lot from you. In fact, I currently use 2 different platforms that you introduced to me. So I'm telling anybody who's listening or watching this podcast, if you want a masterclass in LSP marketing, go to Rick's presentation, because I don't know how you actually get all that information ahead of everybody else, but
you
do
words,
amazingly well.
Man. Thank you.
I did hear a rumor, because Rick and we rode our bicycles from Seattle to Portland for the ALC event in September. And that was an adventure. But I did hear a rumor that you're going to be riding your bicycle to Peru.
Interesting rumor. Not my bicycle and not on this trip, but I do plan on riding a motorcycle from Seattle all the way to Ushuaia, the southern tip of Argentina. So I don't have a specific date on that trip yet, but yeah, it's happening, man.
Dude, that would be so awesome, and I will ride with you part of the way. Okay,
let's talk about it for sure.
So awesome, Carrie. What are your expectations, and your how will you be participating at Vamos Juntos?
So I'll be a speaker as well, and I'm going. I'm from the client side. I've been on the client side for my entire career, so I'm going to maybe talk about that journey a little bit. I'd like to give insights to maybe those who aren't on the client side or on the LSP side, and what goes through our minds on the client side. Making a decision around vendor selection, things like that. And for the record, I am booking a gourmet Lima tour. That was I was told to do that immediately. So, because like you said, Lima's the culinary capital of the world. I'm just so amazed. I'm actually flying my son, who's still in bed, over because it's his
He can't go
spring
to school,
break
but he can go
that
to Lima.
entire
What the
week.
hell?
And, it's a trip of a lifetime, really. So I was very grateful that Charles approached me at ALC and said, hey, would you be interested in, coming to Lima, and showed me a picture of the beach, and that was about all it took.
That's funny. Charles is also the master marketer.
Charles is.
Look at this.
I
You
got
want to
two
go?
words for Charles that sold, I think, so many people. Pisco sour. Like, you put those two things together, everybody's like,
Yeah.
let's go.
That's awesome, man. Speaking of which, what's actually in that drink, Charles?
Pisco sour, well, the main ingredient is pisco, which it's very difficult to describe, because if you mention a word like it's sort of like whiskey, Peruvians will go nuts and say it's not like whiskey. You have to go there to try it, Mark. It's sweet, but it's very strong, and you should only have two. The third one, it's not a good idea.
I'll chime in here because I'm a big fan of the pisco sour. Pisco is one of the South American liquors. I believe it's grape-based. Bolivia has their own version. My family, just full disclosure, my family's all from Bolivia. Both my parents were born and raised there. And I actually have a cousin who just recently opened a distillery in Bolivia for Singani, which is the Bolivian version of pisco. So the pisco sour, as I understand it, has this grape-based liqueur, lots of lime juice, and egg white. It is shaken to a frothy consistency and poured in an up glass, a chilled up glass, and like 3 or 4 dots of bitters on top, and it's fantastic.
So I'm going to get my
brain's exploding
as well as get loopy.
We'll do that together.
Yeah, you're drinking a work of art, that's for sure. As I said, just stick to 2, though.
So Rick, why aren't we bringing these to America, man?
Mark, I know you and I drink beer together, but I have them all the
brand
time. I bust out the shaker. Wow, maybe not all the time. I shouldn't say that, but
I gotta check it out. Well, hey, closing thoughts or comments in regards to Vamos Juntos or South America or just anything in general. Open floor. Who'd like to go?
Sure. Well,
I'm so excited.
Vamos Juntos is,
as
I've said, sorry, did I ask?
No.
Well, I was just going to say, Vamos Juntos is really exciting. I've been working on this with the other members of the board, Rosalind Famous, Rafael Sosa, Ivan Escamilla, Saul Villegas, and David Mego, who is in Lima and is doing all the logistical groundwork, finding out the best restaurants, Rick, all those sorts of things. We've been working on this for a long time. It feels like forever, and it's just around the corner. We're really excited. David Mego is going to be the host. David Mego from Bilingual, who's also on the ALC board, I believe. Rosalind Famous also on the ALC board. So strong connections between ALC and Juntos. A lot of ALC people will be in attendance. Juntos is going to be a wonderful experience. They're going to be world-class speakers, and that's important because maybe for some reason, as I mentioned, that example of dumbing down translations and talking about it being, make it for a 5th grade audience. Maybe there was a perception that conferences in Latin America weren't going to be as interesting as conferences elsewhere on the planet in the past. And really, there hasn't been much going on outside of Argentina. Argentina's had a lot going on, but in the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, there hasn't been much in terms of gatherings for localization, interpreting, and translation. Although the ALC is going to Latin America and the Caribbean for 2 years in a row for its conference with the Cancun conference next month. So Vamos Juntos is going to be exciting. World-class food, as Rick said. There's also archaeological ruins like Machu Picchu. There's beaches, as Carrie said. It's going to be warm. It's not going to be cold, freezing, no snow. It never snows in Lima. So there's just so much to do, and different people will make out of it what they want to do in terms of learning, networking, coaching, mentoring, and benchmarking. I'm really excited about it. TBO is going to be there in force, and it's going to be great to catch up with so many old friends and new friends and meet people that you've never even heard of before.
Awesome, man. I'm like, as we've been talking now for like 54 minutes, and I wouldn't say my interest level, but my expectation that I would go to Vamos Juntos was relatively low because, like I said, I don't have business in that region. But like, it's been 54 minutes and like, I'm just mentally trying to figure out how can I get there? So you guys have done an amazing job. Carrie, you were going to say something.
No, I'm just looking forward to learning from Rick and others. And, like Charles said, there's a lot of contacts. We all have a ton of contacts in our LinkedIn, but not a lot for me from that region. So I'm really looking forward to networking and connecting as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
Rick?
it's a really similar reaction to what you're saying, Carrie. I mean, it is about, for me, it's very much about the networking and learning. There's other speakers we got there. You mentioned, Charles, that Renato is going to be there from NIMSY. Natalie Kelly's going to be there. I'm very interested to see what they're going to be talking about. So I really want to come away with some inspiration, some ideas, and connections, and we'll see what happens. But I agree with you, Mark. It's funny, like, when I first heard about the event, I was like, oh, it's interesting. And then I was like, oh, it's where? And then it was like, who's going to be there and who are the speakers? And I can see why your reaction is probably really similar to a lot of others in the industry. It's like, well, I kind of don't want to miss that. And so that's where I am on this one. I don't want to miss it.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome, guys. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time and your expertise and leadership in our industry. I did want to talk about your leadership roles, but we're coming up on our time here. Just as a shout out, Rick, you were former president, or I guess the leader. I don't know if it's title's president of the ALC, right? And I think you're still a board member. Yeah. And Charles, you're a co-founder of the Juntos and the Vamos Juntos event. Carrie, I think you are president or former president of Women in Localization. So I want to say, thank you for your leadership in our industry. Thank you for your time today. And I'd like to wish you guys an awesome time down there. And can you find an excuse for me to get there somehow? So anyway, thanks guys. And thanks for being on memoQ Talks.
memoQ is a sponsor, Mark.
Thank you.
memoQ is a sponsor. Thank you for bringing it up. Charles, earlier I was going to ask you, because you were talking about technology platforms and how the talent in South America are familiar with all types of different technology platforms. Could you give me an example of a technology platform?
Well, memoQ is a sponsor of Vamos Juntos, and a lot of people use memoQ.
Stop right there. Okay.
Plunet and Boostlingo are also sponsors, so there you go.
No. I did the product placement. Charles. And now just guys, thank you so much. And I look forward to meeting you in person someday soon.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.